What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Valley coming at you with a belly flop into the slop that is NBA trade season. That is what we're just going to be covering through the ninth around these parts. I hope to get like a specific mailbag in or whatever, but we're going to try and go through a lot of news, rumor items, talk about some scenarios here so like Grant and I don't have to do it as we roll out our final three division primers. We don't want to waste too much time on short of the updates, and a lot of this stuff just gets outdated, and these little news updates can be fun. We have a few mailbag questions to get to, but very quickly, I must remind everyone, do please, pretty please, continue subscribing to us if you have not already. If you're on YouTube, like, sub, comment, help the algorithm love us back. Hit us up on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast if you've not subbed there already. If you have subbed at both those places, consider telling people about us. Shout us out on Twitter, retweet our promos, all that good stuff helps. Join our Discord. If you're in the Discord, bring people with you, bring friends to enhance and increase the basketball discussion there. That's where we have like the best discussions. It's not, trust me, it's not happening on Twitter. As someone who just published this massive trade deadline primer, which was very well received for the most part, I must say, having to go through the slop of the comment section, it was better to talk about stuff in Discord. And I'm not as active normally in Discord as I am, mostly because it's trade season and my schedule is like caps lock fucked up right now, but I'm still in there. I'm still watching. Join our Discord. Link is in the podcast and the YouTube description. Follow us on all the socials. Instagram, we're almost at 200 followers at Hardwood_Knocks. That is a very, pathetic milestone, I guess, but I don't know how to gain traction on these sites. We did clear 200 followers on TikTok at HardwoodKnocks on TikTok. So go check us out there. And we're on Twitter at HardwoodKnocks, over 5K followers there. So that's like kind of exciting. Those are all the housekeeping notes I have. And so let's dive into some of the news items that we might have missed since we last recorded, or basically they're all kind of like breaking, but I'll start with the Myles Turner renegotiate and extend. So he ends up, the structure of this, it's a 2-year extension. He reportedly did not want to sign a longer one, which makes sense because this is going to put him back in free agency in 2025. I believe that is when the cap spike from the new TV deal is supposed to be implemented. So it ends up being a 2-year, $35 million extension with an additional $17 million tacked onto this season's salary. There was a big debate over this. Larry Kuhn, Eric Pincus, even Dunked On guys had talked about it. And the verdict is that Myles Turner can still be traded because of the terms of this extension. However, when you go back and look at the press conference, what Myles Turner said, what Kevin Pritchard said, it doesn't sound like he'll be traded. Kevin Pritchard did say something along the lines, though, of we're not of the mind of signing players to contracts to trade them. It's more to keep them. So this is a different organization, but I would just caution everyone to say the Warriors essentially said the same thing about D'Angelo Russell and looked what happened in the middle of the year. I would still be fairly surprised if Myles Turner gets dealt now after signing this extension. Just because why sign him to this deal if you were going to move him now? Maybe it's something you address over the offseason around the draft. It could still, the fact that it could technically happen and that the terms were like basically unfolded so that it could specifically happen and they didn't run into issues. Although I would question whether the league might look into this if they did renegotiate and extend him and send him elsewhere. But so I don't think that he's going to be traded is my point. I think it's good value for probably both sides, more so the Pacers. Myles Turner is going to get a huge bump this season. They get to the salary cap floor. He's at now around $35 million in salary. Then next year he's at $20.9 million, and the final year of his deal is at $19.9 million. And so those feel like, 2 years, $58 million for Myles Turner after this feels, it's a total, it's two additional years and $60 million total, but it's really after this year, you have him at 2 years and a little over $40 million, which feels like a bargain for Myles Turner. We are caking in this season's salary, of course, but to have him at that number gives you all different sorts of possibilities when it comes to trading him, making other trades, making other moves, if you want to use cap space or just paying other guys. So I think this is smart business by the Pacers. And then for Turner specifically, lock down some financial security. You're a more featured part of what the Pacers are doing. And this also kind of gives both sides some clarity of, well, not both sides, but the Pacers some clarity of what they should do at the 4 now. I like John Collins for this team even more. Yes, we've seen them fall off during the Tyrese Halliburton injury, but you make a trade like that for not just this season, but beyond. And the Pacers aren't a team that necessarily is looking to tank. Last year was an anomaly there. And so if they're organically bad is one thing. The fact that it doesn't seem like they're going to trade Myles Turner, though, unless they're just going to shut him down, shut Tyrese Halliburton down once he comes back. I think that they could be stealthy buyers or opportunistic buyers at the deadline. They still do have like close to $11 million in cap space floating around, by the way. I also think this extension makes the Spurs cap space that much more valuable if teams are looking to offload money there. But I think it wasn't surprising that this happened. I do think the discussion over whether he could be traded, that turned out to be interesting. And I think this, rest assured, the Myles Turner trade rumors, like those aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Like they're just going to continue to immediately after after this season. Other notes. So I guess we should just get to, well, the Raptors are going to take up a big part of this. Let's get to the Jerami Grant. Jake Fisher had reported that Grant had not accepted the 4-year, $112.7 million extension the Blazers have offered him. Didn't say that he wouldn't. He could sign it up to June 30th, but it was just very careful to say that he hadn't accepted the largest allowable extension. Does he think that he could do better on an average annual value once he hits the open market? I think his max this summer would be about $37 million. I don't know that he is going to approach that, like even close to it. Could a team give him 30 though? Maybe. Grant did tell Jason Quick of The Athletic that he would wait until the offseason to decide. And look, he can. He'll have all this information coming in. June 30th is basically right before free agency, so he could sign it before then. We also know that these conversations are taking place prior to the start of free agency. And so he might have a team lined up if they're willing to pay him X amount. That's something he can sign or use as leverage to the Blazers. Now, what does get interesting here, if you're Portland, they are a team that I think should sell, because I'm not saying blow it up and trade Dame, but they're just kind of stuck in the morass of the Western Conference. And that's where parity becomes tough, because how do you look at yourself, you look at your team internally and say, okay, we might be 12th in the West as I record this, but we're only 3 games back of a home court advantage spot. We're only 4.5 games back of the 3 seed. But you also have so many teams in front of you when you're talking about that who are within that range. So what do? You are on Damian Lillard's timeline, so I don't expect him to be mega sellers here where it's, we're going to recoup all these draft picks. But when you're looking at Josh Hart specifically, when you're looking at Jerami Grant now, this is where it gets tough for you. If he's not going to sign the extension, do you risk it going into free agency? You know that you can pay him the most. Are you just going to allow yourself to fall into that bird rights trap, as John Hollinger, The Athletic, calls it, where it's, okay, we're going to throw in the 5th year just to keep him, or we're going to come over the top and match a salary that we otherwise wouldn't be comfortable paying him? And so it's one thing to pay Jerami Grant 4 years and $112.7 million, but that just inches closer on an annual basis to his max. It's less of a no-brainer for the Blazers, and yet if you have kept him, you would risk losing him for nothing at that point, which is why if he's not going to sign the extension before the deadline, I think you have to at least look at this point. You're the 12th seed in the West. You could very easily be the 4 seed in the West. So I know that this is difficult, and Jerami Grant is extremely valuable to what you do. He's been their second best player this season, even more so than a Simons or a Nurkic there. I just wonder if it's something that we hear closer to the trade deadline. What if, Portland loses like 3 of 4 going into there, and all of a sudden it's, the Lakers usurped them in the standings and now they're 13th. I'm just wondering if there's Jerami Grant noise in addition to Josh Hart noise that we hear. We've also already heard that there's Yusuf Nurkic noise, but they would love to move him. I will say that just like, I don't view Yusuf Nurkic as a very solid player. I just don't view him as like a player that you can readily move in kind of today's NBA, depending on the defensive infrastructure around him. And so he has, after this season, because he just signed a new 4-year deal, 3 years and $54.4 million left on his contract. I don't know if that might be like sort of market value for him. I'm not trying to just downplay how good he is. I would just be curious what they could get him. Would San Antonio even take him into their cap space at this point and send you back Richardson? And you're not going to get Pirtle for Nurkic. I think they'd rather risk him going to free agency, but McDermott and Richardson for Nurkic, that's something that they would even consider. I don't know. It feels like if you're moving Nurkic, it's going to be part of a mega trade where you're pairing non-guaranteed first-round picks at this point because of that protection, the way that's set up to Chicago, or just pairing him to other salary. Is it Josh Hart involved in there? The Blazers would be a team, and I received a lot of pushback because I wrote about this a week or so ago, that they could not define the trade deadline, but if we're looking for sort of just a squad that's going to make a surprise move, is it maybe even a buy, but it could also be a sell? It's the Blazers for me. And there are other teams that you could certainly loop under that umbrella, but just Portland's in this weird spot. I was very high on them coming into the season. Their defense has very much slipped off since the beginning of the year. Nekias Duncan did have a great thread though about their latest game, where it's more of a, I guess it's a personnel thing, but it's not really an effort thing on a night to night basis. There can be just sort of some oddity with the Simons Lillard backcourt, of course, and then Simons lackadaisical closeouts, and it sometimes feels like he's playing with the energy of someone who's going to the DMV and waiting in line to get their picture taken for a couple of hours on defense, that is. But I liked the makeup of their team, and they could stand to get a little bigger, although I like the versatility in a lot of their lineups, especially when Justice Winslow is healthy. So I don't necessarily, if I were them, I would sell, just because I think they're way too far away from the contender tier. I also don't know what their pathway is to getting up there, which really complicates matters for them. And so they are a team that I still expect could go either way. All the reporting says that they will go the buy route. They're not set up to go the buy route readily. Like if you want them to join let's say there's the Pascal Siakam or even OG Anunoby sweepstakes, they can enter some interesting discussions if Shaedon Sharpe is on the table. But that first round pick to Chicago, it is protected until 2028. And so they technically cannot guarantee a first round pick at all. If you're a team that's taking a conditional first, you're betting that they're going to make the playoffs at some point soon. And that just kind of limits then, okay, well, how do you stack picks on top of one another? They could try to renegotiate and get rid of the protections with Chicago. Maybe the Bulls are willing to do that because of where the Blazers could end up in the West. It's, if the Blazers are getting, let's just say they're getting OG Anunoby, does that really guarantee that they're going to get out of the lottery? No. And so the Bulls, if they can get that pick unprotected, they might be like, you know what? Okay, we'll take a little something to do that. So I wouldn't, if I'm Chicago, I wouldn't rule it out. Because it's only lottery protected into the distance. That doesn't change. And so it's really more of a risk on Portland's behalf. But that would be what you have to do if you're going to make the bigger move. And would that make Chicago? It'd be interesting. Would Chicago be more likely to make sort of a sales job of their own if they were able to unprotect the Portland pick all of a sudden, and it's all right, well, we owe that protected pick to Orlando, but we're going to have this unprotected pick from the Blazers coming in, and they're not guaranteed to be really good for the rest of the season. That would throw an interesting wrinkle into everything there. So Portland's still a team to watch because of Jerami Grant to me. The Jerami Grant extension, I mean, they're going to be a team to watch anyway because of Josh Hart, and they could stand to just get bigger. Yusuf Nurkic and Drew Eubanks are the only players on their roster, I think, standing over 6'9" or whatever it is. I just don't have a feel for the ceiling on their moves, especially with, based off conversations that I have had with not, Blazers, not Joe Cronin himself, but just multiple people in the market, that Shaedon Sharpe wouldn't even be on the table in an OG Anunoby trade. Pascal Siakam might be a different story. I think that's a mistake when it comes to OG Anunoby, just if you're on the win now timeline for the Blazers. That being said, if that's sort of how you're viewing this, I don't think they have the huge swing in them. It's, can they get a Naz Reid, and is he even big enough for that? And do you just take a flyer on Rashawn Holmes from the Kings, who I still believe is he can have value. You don't love his contract, but if the Kings are giving you some second round picks and you're giving up Josh Hart, why not? That feels like the type of move they're most likely to make. I just wouldn't rule out, oh, fuck, the Blazers just trade Jerami Grant, or shit, did Anthony Simons get moved at the I just wouldn't rule it out. That is all I'm saying. The next bit of news is, so this is like a mini note, but actually let's tie this into a mailbag question that I thought was interesting from Moose _ machine in Discord. Excuse me. So the question is this: just a more general question for the trade season. When a rumor story comes out about a trade or a team's interest in a particular player, is that info usually released by a player's agents or the front office themselves? Any advice for distinguishing what's actual news or likely to be completed, and what is just information being used as leveraged, assuming there even is any actual difference? This is a great question, and I think people get criticized for taking rumors at face value. And part of the intrigue of NBA Twitter now is sort of debunking and trying to find which side leaked the rumor. I think the jokes and the immediate responses on Twitter, I do it all the time. If you want to make jokes, 100%, I'm all for that. But I think it's important to stop, look at the rumor, and say, who is this benefiting? And so let's just use two of the latest ones as an example. Jaylen Nowell, this comes from Shams Charania, is unlikely to re-sign with the Timberwolves when he enters unrestricted free agency this summer. Now, this isn't a big name, but just like him and McLaughlin were like kind of sort of being trumpeted up as we entered this season. When you look at the information that's being relayed here, why is this coming out? Who is this benefiting? This is benefiting Jaylen Nowell because it means that he wants to kind of force a hand of a trade where maybe he's going to play a more prominent role, or wants to kind of put leverage on the Timberwolves to, are they going to pony up after he rejected an extension this past fall, or is it just to let teams know that he's going to be available, and so kind of factor him into your plans, not just into the offseason, but at the trade deadline, where it's, if you can give me a 23-year-old just more playing time, I might re-sign with you, and I might just be someone who's available that you think you could get that you weren't necessarily thinking about because I'm not this huge name. And it's clearly, it's benefiting him. And so this is coming from, is it necessarily coming from Jaylen Nowell's agent? No, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the leak. It could be Jaylen Nowell actually told like Shams Charania himself this. But of course, when you're looking at reporters, I don't want to say they're more embedded, but like they are getting a lot of their information from agents, which in this case for Jaylen Nowell would be Ryan Davis. So you look at, to me, the source of a rumor and say, who is this benefiting? Why would it come out now? And there are sometimes where we really can't figure it out. Like the James Harden to Houston stuff around Christmas was like, that doesn't really seem like it benefits anyone at this point. Maybe the Rockets, but why would they let that out? And it felt like sort of a blunder in the sense that, oh, this is what happens because James Harden doesn't really have an acting agent right now. This is what happens when you don't have an agent and there's really no one looking out for your best interests. Philly has since gone on a run and they look like they might be one of the 3-4 most title favorites, whatever, yada, yada, yada. So that is okay. It's coming from Jaylen Nowell's camp. And like, we're just trying to dissect this. The other rumor is that, and I don't want to say it's a duh rumor, but it's a duh rumor, that the Mavericks would be willing to trade. Well, really quickly on Jaylen Nowell, he needs to hit more than like sub 30% of his threes if there really wants to be a market for him. The Wolves are kind of interesting in that sense, though, because of their guard situation with D'Lo entering free agency too. Do they move him? Can you afford to move Nowell if you move D'Lo as well? I will say the fact that you're just in the process of turning the keys over to Anthony Edwards and Kyle Anderson has just been really, 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 really good this season. I think it gives them some more leeway to kind of look at that. I've also kind of contemplated, and we'll get to this player. So let's just stop here. We're going to get to this player. Bones Hyland. The first one to talk about this was Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports, saying that the Nuggets had begun to explore trades for Bones Hyland. Mark Stein followed up that report, saying that Bones Hyland has quickly become one of the most likely players to be moved at the trade deadline. I still might be fairly shocked if he's like moved. But there were, within those both reports, is that Bones Hyland has become frustrated. He's clashed with Michael Malone, wants more of a stable role. That, to me, so no one's necessarily coming off in a bad light here, but you look at that report, okay, who is this benefiting? It's not benefiting the Nuggets to let this get out, that they're readily shopping him, because, yeah, that might attract more suitors. It kind of dilutes their value. And the fact that they're saying, oh, he could be moved for a first-round pick, that, to me, is even worse, because you're a team that's trying to win now. First-round pick doesn't do much for you unless you're sort of rerouting it in another trade. So that, to me, it's going to benefit Bones Hyland in the same sense as, oh, if he's clashing with Michael Malone, there's clearly both sides, which is what I think both sides are giving information here, which I also think is important to note. When you look at the source that it's coming from, where I don't really like using the word mouthpiece, but when they are reputable reporters and the information doesn't feel so one-sided, it's because there's been follow. And Mark Stein is among the best in the business at doing this. I would say Jake Fisher is as well. I am just going to tell you that I do not think Charania and Woj are, that's not something that they behold themselves to at all. There are times, yeah, they are the two most plugged in guys in the business, but like they're more likely to deliver one-sided reports than a Jake Fisher or Mark Stein or Chris Haynes. That's what I'm getting at. So you also kind of look at the source of this, and the Nowell example is perfect here with Charania, where, okay, well, that was just kind of relayed. That's agent. That's him doing a solid for Nowell's agent and by extension, Nowell. For this, when you come away saying, who did this benefit? And it benefits, I think, Bones maybe more so than anyone, because if teams know he's available, if they think he's cheaper than expected, yeah, well, they take a flyer on him if they're going to give him a more specific role, or if he's just frustrated and kind of voicing his irritations this route. That to me, so that report, yeah, it's probably coming from the player, but the fact that like there's the asking price in there and then the information, more importantly, that he's clashing with Michael Malone or unhappy with his role, you don't want that displeasure or those notables to come out if you are Bones Hyland and his camp. And so that's like, oh, there's something to this because clearly, to me, both sides are involved here. And I think that's the best way to discern from a real rumor versus, I guess, one that you shouldn't take seriously is, can there be a balance here? And I'm not saying you shouldn't take Jaylen Nowell's rumor seriously. It's just that if the Wolves don't move Jaylen Nowell and they lose him in free agency, they will be okay. That's clearly a rumor that's going to benefit him. And I would have to echo even more so, like, obviously trust the sources where it's, I don't want to really name drop names to call out people that I think are doing a bad job or that you wouldn't trust, but like you have the main reporters are just out there. If it's a team beat reporter that's around the team and they're not one to, normally break news all the time, but they have information on that team, yes, you believe them, they're a beat reporter. If they're all of a sudden giving you information on other teams, which they've never done before, no, you shouldn't take that too seriously. You take it with a metric ton of salt. If you are quick to see reporters debunking other reporters, then it's really time to start digging deeper into here. And we saw that with the James Harden stuff last year, where Woj was like, no, he's not asking for out. And then all of a sudden he's asking for out. And he was kind of like, rebuking his own, his colleague, Brian Windhorst, who had it right. It's like, but those are the guys, if you hear something from Windhorst, if you hear something from Zach Lowe, of course, he doesn't do like a ton of reporting, but he'll throw tidbits in there. From Mark Stein, Jake Fisher, Chris Haynes, like those are the five where I think they do such a balanced job, and specifically the four, since Lowe doesn't like necessarily cannonball into this too much, where it's if they say something, it's like, oh shit, like that's real. With Woj and Shams, they're going to have the trades first. They're going to have all the juiciest information, but you need to see how one-sided it is and how much of a solid they're doing. Or are they trying to discredit, or are they like doing a solid for an agent, or are they trying to make sure that they could technically be first to the information at a later date? So they're trying to discredit a report. There's more gaming going on with those two, I would say, than there is for other reporters who maybe, when you look at Mark Stein, like he's on his own Substack. He's not beholden to, everyone's beholden to their relationships, but he's not beholden to a larger entity the way that Woj or Shams might be, or it doesn't seem to be as beholden to agents as those two might be. Again, I could just be wrong on all of this. I'm just giving you my perspective. I do think it's possible to sort of discern from, well, what do you think is real? What do you think is fake, or what's to be taken seriously? But I will wrap up this little tidbit, and we were sort of using the Bones Hyland stuff to get here, is that so many trades, the vast majority of which we are not hearing about in exact terms. The James Harden one last year is like almost an anomaly in the sense that typically those blockbuster deals will almost come out of nowhere, even if we know the player is on the block. Like, yeah, did we know that the Blazers might blow it up last year? For sure. Did we realize that the Pelicans were going to jump in and get McCollum, or that Powell was going to head to the Clippers? Did we realize that, yeah, there was something that could go on in Indiana? Did we realize there was going to be some bonus to the Kings for Halliburton? No. Those deals come out of nowhere. They might be talked about in the bowels of league circles, where we'll hear a reporter come out and say, well, like I heard this, but I didn't say it beforehand. That's like my least favorite form of reporting, by the way, where they come out and say like, oh yeah, like we knew about it, we just couldn't say anything. It's like, well, you don't get the flex after the fact because you didn't relay it to the masses. I would say that when Jake Fisher has done the best job of this is when he unbottles information and specific trade details or contracts and looking at free agency, buckle up and fucking listen, read, whatever, because it's real. He might report on when he starts talking about specific talks that might have sort of petered out. That's just him relaying information or maybe backing something else up. But he is the king, I would say, of having information that actually pans out in the exact way, where there's more specifics in there, contract details, trade details. That's not to discredit someone like Haynes or Stein or all these other guys. Woj and Shams seem way more likely to actually report the details of a trade first. But if you're looking for something that might happen before it happens, it's Jake Fisher is just the guy. And I have to respect, not just because he's been on this podcast or that we were technically colleagues for a couple of years at Bleacher Report, just like the personality and opinions that he weaves into his analysis when he's on his podcast or in his writing. I just really appreciate that. It's super relatable and not something you get from the previous generation of the older generation of the NBA breaking news heads. So shout out to Jake Fisher for that. But I would say that if you ever start to hear, and it's not from like him or it's not from Stein, there's we very rarely know the specific details of a trade package. Like, we're normally hearing who's available, who's interested in who, and something like a Bones Hyland case. Yeah, it's clear that the Nuggets are exploring their options. They're in win now mode. His defense has been atrocious. He's had some rough stretches, especially inside the arc this year on offense. So you can take that and say, okay, yeah, that makes sense here. Do you bank on him being one of the most likely players to be moved? That feels like, is it benefiting him a little bit more than that? Because the Nuggets can't necessarily afford to sell low. They've played most of their best trade chips now. They have Hyland, they have Christian Brown, they have Peyton Watson, and then like it's a 2029 first that isn't guaranteed to convey because of their commitment to Oklahoma City. And so they have to be very particular and specific about who they go after in a Bones Hyland trade, which I guess we should talk more about Bones Hyland here in general. I don't know what he would end up being moved for. They want a bigger wing. Those aren't just like sitting around out there for them to get. Some people have, and I proposed this trade in my primer. It was from the Bulls side. Alex Caruso going back to Denver. They have the trade exception that's perfectly sized for him. I'd probably do it if I was Denver, and Caruso and Brown can both size up, but you almost make that trade out of the fear Bruce Brown's going to leave this summer, which he might. And that would actually factor into another question that we had from was it Unbiased Pistons fan, or I can't even remember where it was from. So I apologize, but they asked how much is Bruce Brown going to get in free agency, and could he get 15 million-ish a year? This was no name for God. How much could Bruce Brown ask for as a free agent? 15 million more? I would say he's at least going to ask for the full MLE this season, which is going to put him, which is why, first of all, he's going to opt out. And that's the trouble with the Nuggets. So they have him on a player option at $6.8 million. They can offer him up to, if he opts out, 120% raise off of this salary is the max that they can offer him if they don't have cap space. That's really not going to cut it. We're talking about something that's still going to be under the $8 million range. If he gets the full MLE, he's going to wind up being at about like $11 million, I think, is where the full MLE is going to check in. Let's double check here. It's 11.4 million. And so I would say that's where he'll be at. What does benefit him is there are a few more teams that have cap space this summer than last. Not all of them are necessarily on a Bruce Brown timeline, but it wouldn't shock me if he was able to get maybe a shorter term deal in the range that was like 2 years and 30 million. And so the average annual value is higher, but it's shorter term there. A team like the Rockets, because they owe their pick to OKC next year, that they sort of try to get in on this bidding. I don't think OKC, their cap space team, would go after him. I don't think Orlando would go after him. The Kings, they could technically have cap space this year. They could. That's if they renounce Barnes, though. The Spurs will have cap space. Not really a Bruce Brown team. The Hornets, that's without PJ Washington, though. So I think he's probably going to end up. Indiana would be one. They could still have cap space this year. Myles Turner is going to eat into some of that, but I think they could still get up to. Maybe they move Buddy Hield. Maybe they just even move TJ McConnell, so they could get some room. Are they a Bruce Brown team though? No. Which is why I would expect when you're looking at the teams with cap space, there's maybe like one or two I could see making an offer to Brown. I would expect him to be in the non-taxpayer mid-level territory, which is 11.4 million. Again, maybe he goes a little bit beyond that. The Nuggets cannot keep him at that number, which is then why you would make the Caruso trade, because you have those two now, and then Caruso's under the books next season. So you're replacing what you get from Brown. They can both guard up. They're both point of attack whizzes. So I get it from that perspective. You're looking for front line defensive help. How long is it going to be till Javonte Green is healthy? He could really help you out there. Might be a factor if you were making that deal. Otherwise, because Bones makes so little, and the fact that the Nuggets don't have like a ton of other salary to pair him with, you're looking at Bones at 2.2 million this season. They do have some wiggle room because they could take a player in that $9 million trade exception. That's not, some of the better players that you're going to want are going to cost more than that when you're looking at bigger wings in particular. And so some people floated, well, could they get into the OG Anunoby sweepstakes? Let's just use that as a like a quick example. No, they can't, because let's even say they put Christian Brown and then their 2029 first on the table in addition to Bones Hyland and Zeke Naji. Like now we're talking about 3 players for one, and you've only like added up to less than $10 million in salary. You could step ladder your way higher with Ish Smith at 4.7, Jeff Green at 4.5, unless you're going to move an Aaron Gordon at 19.7 and then Michael Porter Jr. at 30.9. You're not going to move Murray or Jokic. It gets too hard to take back players of real value. I spent some time trying to figure out, could there be a match here with the Nuggets in Minnesota and Jaden McDaniels, and then also maybe Jaylen Nowell going back to Denver if they think he's going to leave. And so you kind of replace like the backup point guard spot with Bones. And if Minnesota's really worried about D'Angelo Russell leaving, they do get some scoring off the bench now. Maybe they don't have to trade D'Lo at the moment, or they trade him anyway. And then you sort of have Bones waiting as an heir apparent, but not even really, because you turn the offense over to Anthony Edwards anyway. Bones for McDaniels straight up isn't happening. The Timberwolves, as far as we know, put a 2 first-round pick bounty on Jaden McDaniels in trade talks with the Jazz for Rudy Gobert. So they treat him like the equivalent of 2 first-round picks. He does have another year of his rookie scale left after this, and you're going to be able to keep him via restricted free agency or an extension after that. The Nuggets would be the team that have to give up more, is my point. Does Bones Hyland and Christian Brown get it done for Jaden McDaniels? It's tough. If the Timberwolves were looking at rebuilding, maybe, but they're not. And so like it might take those 2 plus that 2029 first to get Jaden McDaniels out there based on fit. So could you rally a third team in there? But Jaden McDaniels is someone I looked at because he is still so cheap. What the Nuggets could technically do is move Bruce Brown in conjunction with Bones Hyland if they think they're getting someone back who replaces Bruce Brown. And so, like, would that be something that could get you Jaden McDaniels? Do the Timberwolves look at that? They could, in theory, be outside of the tax next year if they let D'Lo come off. And so then they would be able to give Brown the full MLE. They might even be, I mean, if they were going to get rid of D'Lo, I think they have a path to cap space, or a little bit of cap space if they really wanted to. Probably not enough to matter, though. So, but they could be under the tax. Does that give them a puncher's chance of being able to keep Bruce Brown? Like they could get to it. Like I have him in I'm looking, I haven't done the calculation yet, but they could maybe, if they got rid of D'Lo, they could really stretch it out and get to 12 million, which is just above the MLE. So you'd rather not jump through all the hoops. But if you can afford the MLE, is that something they would look at? You're losing a lot of size there, though, in Bruce Brown. But that's just like, that's what's so tough about the Bones Hyland situation. And the Nuggets also just don't have this dispensable larger salary to move off of. And I don't think that you should be trading him for a first round pick right now, again, unless you're then rerouting that as part of a different deal. And so I would disagree with the idea that he's one of the most likely players to be traded. I just think this is sort of, we're getting close to the trade deadline and steam is picking up. We very rarely see players on rookie scales who are this useful, even if you think he's a one-way player or just this microwave scorer off the bench, get moved like this so soon. And maybe it's more of a decision you make over the offseason after you go through the postseason. The other bit of news that you could use is like, oh, do we want to spot? Like, how do we spot where rumors coming from? The Dallas Mavericks would be willing to move Dorian Finney-Smith as part of a trade for a star, which is kind of like and then also the Utah Jazz are interested in him. We know that that's just the Jazz throwing stuff out there, and Tim McMahon confirmed this basically on the Low Post recently. So you look at that, when it says Team X is interested in a player, that is coming, it's either coming from that team or that player's agent. And for the most part, if the player's under long-term contract, it's going to be coming from the team that's interested in him. Now, if it's a player who's entering free agency, where if we all of a sudden heard, this is just an example, the Clippers are interested in Christian Wood or something, that's probably coming from Christian Wood's camp to try and drum up interest or leverage in extension talks with the Mavericks, or just to show that he's valued around the league in general ahead of his free agency. But when it's a player like Dorian Finney-Smith, who's under contract, only just signed an extension last year, it's very clearly the Jazz want him. And then also when it's, oh, they'll move him for a star, that's just sort of like, that's coming from, I guess, the Mavericks, or it could be that teams have heard that like pitches from the Mavericks on stars and Dorian Finney-Smith has been involved in them. I would be floored if Dorian Finney-Smith got moved by this year's trade deadline, just because the Mavericks' best path to making a real blockbuster trade offer is you have all your picks on the table. So you need this 2023 selection from the Knicks to convey so that you can head into the offseason and then offer 4 picks, 3 swaps. And then where it gets tricky with them, they don't have these sort of blue chip prospects. It's not Josh Green. Sorry. It's not Jaden Hardy. Players like Dorian Finney-Smith, or when he's eligible to be traded, Maxi Kleba, if he's healthy, like those are going to be the players that appeal the most. You might have some interest in Tim Hardaway Jr. just because of the salary matching fodder. But like Dorian Finney-Smith, as someone who's on a really good contract, is a 3-and-D wing, basically, and very good at what he does, that's going to be among your most attractive assets. And so it's, yeah, no duh, you would trade him as part of a package for a star. I don't think you can put together that package this season. It's too easy. It might be too easy for you to get outbid regardless. Right now, looking at the star trade market, which feels non-existent, I don't know what offer you're making. And I think it could be beat out. And you're not going to move Dorian Finney-Smith independent of that type of deal, especially because of how important he is to your defense, which has not been great this season. That sort of feels like a throwaway. The Jazz being interested in Dorian Finney-Smith, yeah, they're like opportunistic buyers right now, where if they get Finney-Smith or they can get John Collins, I might see them being able to do that while also maybe selling off Malik Beasley, Jarred Vanderbilt, and I'd keep my eye on Mike Conley there as well. Before we get to some questions, let's just cover the circus that is the Raptors. Per Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype, the Fred VanVleet thought he was worth between 30 and 35 million over the offseason, which is why he did not sign an extension with the Raptors, because the maximum they could give him is 25.5. His max this summer is about 37 million. Could he end up in the 30s? Maybe. He probably needs to have a really strong close to the season, but he is someone that you could envision maybe one of the rebuilding teams or teams that are looking to accelerate their position as a rebuilding team. Orlando, Houston, like those are, you could see those teams actually going after him, which does give him some leverage. And so I would be shocked if he probably got that much, especially given that he's had overall a down year, but it's just someone who's going to be able to control possessions without losing the ball. He is still a very good defender. He can jumpstart some of your offense, and you have to imagine that the 3-point percentage is going to rebound, especially on catch and shoots moving forward. But also like an undersized guard getting older, never really excelled as like an off the bounce finisher, either as a mid-range scorer or even a 3-point pull-up shooter. That's like kind of, I feel like pulls his top end market below $30 million. And like 25.5 million, the max he could get an extension, that actually kind of felt like fair. Maybe he can get closer to 30, but if he gets over $30 million a year, maybe he's looking for the Kyle Lowry treatment. If it's a 3-year deal, maybe I could see that happening. If it's like over 4, that would be fairly surprising to me. There's also the report, this coming out from Shams Charania, that the Raptors are officially listening to offers from OG Anunoby, who is now sidelined with an injury for the next few games, which I think takes us right through the trade deadline. I don't know. People were trying to read between the tea leaves for that. I think that he was actually injured. Look, he has 1 year left on his deal because there's a player option in 2024, 2025 that he's going to decline. I do think that he has become one of the more overrated players in the league, where I think that we are overestimating how diverse his offensive portfolio is. He is shooting 40% on drives. He has more turnovers per game than assists this year. Like as someone who you trust to knock down threes and like, yeah, make the occasional play with the ball in his hands. Sure. And he, like I said, he's a defensive monster, shooting almost 37% on triples this year. I just like when we're talking about the bounty the Raptors were offering, 3 first-round picks, depending on the picks, feels like it's possible. Like if we're talking about a young player and then just like 2 protected picks or 3 really protected picks, looking at the Knicks, yeah, okay, fine. He apparently wants a larger offensive role. That's per multiple reports. I think Shams even had it in his. That's going to, really complicate matters because teams have to consider his free agency coming up. And so are you going to be able to give him an offensive role that he's happy with? Yeah, it's cool that you're willing to pay his next contract. Other teams will be willing to pay his next contract. They're also going to look at it through that lens. It'll be the same thing with VanVleet, where it's like these guys aren't all NBA players. We have to worry about paying their next deal. That might pull some of the sheen away from the offers. I think it's more going to not hurt Anunoby's market, but I think Anunoby's more likely to be moved and us be shocked by what he didn't get. And if I'm the Raptors, I am keeping the asking price super high because you should have the inside track on keeping him long-term just based off having his bird rights. But if he really is unhappy there, and he commented this when he was asked about it, it's tough. I will say, like, some of the teams being thrown out there, the Knicks being heavily invested in him, I get it, but if he wants a larger offensive role and you're not giving up RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, or Jalen Brunson, I don't know where that larger offensive role is coming from. The Grizzlies, I've seen a lot of Grizzlies like, let's go all in for OG Anunoby. What is their biggest problem is, yes, you need to upgrade like the combo forward, the bigger wing spot. He does that. I want to make that clear. But like, what does he do for your half court? Gives you another reliable 3-point shooter, I guess, at semi-modest volume. He's taken, 5 attempts per game this year, and he's been at over 6 in each of the previous 2 seasons while playing a ton of minutes, I might add, during those seasons. Like, okay, but that's not the player I'm going all in for. He's just about to get paid after next year, and like, he doesn't improve my half court offense enough. I would be more interested in Kyle Kuzma, like if I'm the Grizzlies personally, because he's going to drum up my half court offense better. And I don't know that we need to have like this, as Zach Lowe calls it, apex predator, a wing defender on the team. Maybe that's how you feel. Like that would certainly be one way to go to really lean into that model. And I'm not saying if OG Anunoby's not available, don't go after him. I'm just saying Memphis's fit, it just feels overrated to me. I don't think he addresses their biggest needs nearly enough. And so he wouldn't be the player I'd go all in on. And this is to say, like, that player just might not be available to go all in on if you're the Grizzlies. I'm saying I would prefer, especially if the asking price is less, Kuzma, Bojan Bogdanovic. Like, those just feel like better fits for them right now. And so I've seen a lot of it from Grizzlies Twitter too. And like, I think it was Chris Vernon and Bill Simmons. I know Chris Vernon's in the market with Memphis. I don't know if it's Bill Simmons was the one that was driving this. Like, just give up the 3 first-rounders for OG and like, let's be done with it. I am not doing that if I'm Toronto. Like, if it's Golden State's 24 first and I got to give up an unprotected one of my own, I'm probably not doing that, as stupid as it sounds. Like, OG isn't even Jaylen Brown on offense. And that's no disrespect to Jaylen Brown, who's like actually really good and versatile offensive player. So I just don't understand the infatuation there. This feels like a team where he would need to go. Yes, they could give him a little bit more of an offensive role, but like, I'm stammering here because the Grizzlies fit is the one that just confuses me the most. It's like if you were sending him somewhere who could maybe give him a little bit more of an offensive role, but he's still mostly going to be a specialist, and like they didn't need him to be more than that. Where if he goes to the Grizzlies, this is what I'm getting at. He needs to be more than he is now in Toronto, would be my stance. If he goes to New York, probably doesn't necessarily need to be more, but like they're also not good enough to where if I'm him, I'd want to be more. But going to a team like the Grizzlies, yeah, he could be the same player and kind of help them, but they need him to be more. In Phoenix, might be another example. They've been loosely linked to him. They're not giving up Mikal Bridges for him. Mikal Bridges is the better player. He's over his last 12 games, 37% of Mikal Bridges' made field goals have been unassisted. That's up from 24% previously, and that number's way lower when you look at seasons past. This is happening after I said a couple months ago that I was not out on, but I was just like, all right, the ship has sailed on Mikal Bridges being this complicated usage player. Apparently the ship has not sailed. I was wrong about that. The ship has probably sailed on DeAndre Ayton. Suns fans getting mad that I would trade DeAndre Ayton for Fred VanVleet was interesting. I wouldn't even hesitate to do that right now. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, like I said, I was clearly wrong about Mikal Bridges. They're not trading him for OG. Could OG come in and then be the same player and help Phoenix? Yes. I don't know if they need him to be more, but if you're going to make the all-in trade, you need him to be more. So it's like kind of a similar situation with the Grizzlies, is that when you're looking at teams that need these additional creators, and in the form of a bigger wing would be nice. That's not OG Anunoby. I feel like we're losing sight of that. This isn't to say he shouldn't command a bounty. There are just certain teams where, like, if it was, as an example, if it was the Nuggets and they had actual trade assets to give up, oh yeah, do it. The Kings, if they were able to get in on this, my God, could they go back and unprotect that pick to Atlanta at all? That's not even really going to help them because it's 2024. But they would be a team where we don't really need him to do more. We could give him, they might be the perfect team for OG Anunoby when you're trying to look at the role where we can give him the agency to do more. And it might not always go well, but we can give him the agency to do it. But we also don't need him to do it. And we're going to be able to overcome it. And so that is the type of situation where you could see, oh, they will give up the moon for OG Anunoby. And it's really hard for me to spot that team. I think, could we say Memphis is the most likely destination for OG Anunoby? I guess just based off the noise that's out there, but they haven't even been tangibly linked to them. The Suns have been the team that the Suns and the Knicks were tangibly linked to him in the report from Shams. I don't love the fit for either team. If the price is right, sure, what the hell? If I'm the Suns, I want Pascal Siakam more. If I'm the Knicks, I'm not making an all-in trade for anyone that's less than a star. The Pacers would be very interesting for OG Anunoby. You could give him a little bit more offensive agency, but you don't need it. I don't know. They're just not a team that would be in on that. They might be worried about him leaving him for agency. If they put Benedict Mathurin on the table, though, I'd be curious to see if that would get them involved. Could the Heat say, no, they probably need him to do more when you're looking at their head. They actually technically wouldn't need him to do more. I just don't know if he helps their spacing enough. Yeah, and other teams like sort of springing to mind here that could make the all-in offers. This is tougher, I think, than people are when it comes to OG Anunoby specifically. Dallas might be perfect if they were willing to go all in. They don't need him to do more just by virtue of having Luka Doncic, but they also do need him to do more because they need another self-creator. And if you're going to make your all-in play, I think you need a more bankable self-creator than OG Anunoby has shown to be. So they would be close, though. I mean, it's weird that I feel like the Kings are the perfect trade assets aside are like my favorite hypothetical OG Anunoby destination. And they just have, look, the Pelicans even, they're a team that makes sense for him because you don't need him to do more, but you could try and sprinkle it in. At the same time, it could also get really tough with Ingram, Zion, and CJ McCollum in there. Do you have enough room to expand his offensive role? You don't necessarily need him to do more. You do need better shooting on that team, but you need his defense more than anything. I think they would be, I like the Kings even better than the Pelicans for that, but they would be a team that I think, well, we can probably pepper in some more, especially with all the injuries. We can pepper in some more complicated offensive usage. But like he doesn't need to be, we don't need him to be that much better. So we might be able to increase his volume, self-creation volume on offense, or give him more agency on offense, or the same amount of agency on offense. If you don't necessarily need him to be a lot better. So that's what springs to mind there. I would probably bet against him being moved. If I had to say who's the Raptors player most likely to be moved, it's Gary Trent Jr. And that's just a fact. If it's who's the second most likely player, I almost wondered if I've gravitated towards OG a little bit more because I think that, or the Raptors realizing that his value might not actually increase over the summer. And so I'm just going to say that. I think OG Anunoby is now the second most likely Raptor to be traded. How's that for a medium warm take here? Let's see if I can get to some of these questions, one of which has nothing to do with the trade deadline, but let's ask it anyway. This comes from Retro Braden, who asked, longtime listener. He's the one that also pointed out that No Dunk Sink was talking about my trade deadline primer. Thank you, Braden. Questions about the All-Star game. Where is the level of playing enough games to warrant being an All-Star? Example, Zion only needing 28 and most likely won't play versus, say, Kawhi with 26, averaging 37 and 4 with almost 2 steals per game on 57-47 shooting slash for the last 15 games. Not exactly saying Kawhi should be one, but as an example. So yeah, this is tough. I think it's arbitrary when you're looking at it. A lot of it's going to depend on the field. And so the front court field in the West, as an example to me, were just a lot thinner than normal. And so Zion and AD felt like locks to me. And load managing is an issue in the NBA from so many different perspectives. There's obviously evidence that it's important to rest these guys. And I think it says more about the schedule and how it needs to be like the number of games needs to be diminished, or I guess you need to stretch out the schedule longer. But there's an issue on so many fronts where I'm also going to reward the guys that are playing. And if they can't, what I'm getting at here is if you're being rested as a precautionary measure, as a preemptive measure, as being load managed versus you were actually out for an extended period of time with an injury that forced you to be out, I'm going to ascribe more value to the latter than I am the former. That's not, the Clippers are doing what they need to do with Kawhi Leonard, and he was dealing with stuff earlier this season. I totally get it. But that is my view on it. And I'm always going to reward when it comes to the All-Star game, when we're dealing with only a half season sample size too, or if you get to a full season, you're talking all NBA, I'm more inclined not to throw it out, but I'm going to look at who was just the better player, who are the best players overall. And I maybe won't put as much stock in the playing time there. With All-Star, I think it's supposed to be just representative of like, well, who's made the biggest impact or who's been All-Stars to date. To me, that has been the fact that it's exhibition. I don't know how that really changes things, but I'm going to look at it as like, that's why I put Larry Markkinen so high up on the All-Star scales, because he's been so available. When it comes to a Kawhi versus a Zion or Kawhi versus an AD, as an example, AD, yes, him and LeBron were just rested the other night. That was less of a regular occurrence when they were both healthy than what we've seen with Kawhi. And so I look at that, and I'm not shitting on load management. I think it's a problem. I think everyone, I hate to play both sides, but it's like, I get it when you're talking about the fan experience. And we have to look at this through the fan lens of, you want people to pay these astronomical prices to go to games. Why would they ever do that months in advance against certain teams, or even any like star matchup where you can't guarantee that, superstar X is going to play versus superstar Y? And the league is at fault there too, because it's just like, well, we need to figure this out, because these teams aren't just doing it, la-di-da-di. Like, they're doing it because there's, with Kawhi specifically, like, he has lots of lower extremity injuries in his rear view. There was talk of like having the degenerative knee issue at one point. So like, they're doing it as a precautionary measure, and you want to see them healthy for the playoffs. But like, you want these guys to be on the court to just improve the quality of basketball, but also just maximize the fan experience of actually paying to take in these games on site. I'm just going to, I don't want to use the word respect, because Kawhi has been annihilatory when he's been healthy for much of this year. But when it comes to Zion, I'm looking at it as, there were some like precautionary absences with him this year, but he's actually had this injury that is preventing him to play, and was not load managed as much as Kawhi was. And so if it's coming down to those two, especially when the All-Star voting was cut off as well, like, you get to the All-Star break and it's going to be, Kawhi ended up appearing in more games than Zion or whatever. Hindsight 2020 there, but we're looking at like the voting cutoff. That's how I would go about it. I don't have a specific number though. If you've played in less than half of your team's games, like, that has to be, I think it's probably like needs to be closer to 60% if I was to put just a ballpark number on it. But it also just depends on the field. And this year in the front court in the West, I think there was sort of more wiggle room there. This next one comes from, it's Allen, more of a thought exercise or a statement. Was on the Ringer NBA had one of the worst ideas I've heard for both teams. Draymond for John Collins. I don't like shitting on people's trade ideas. And if I was to do it, I want to do it the way No Dunks did it with mine, where they gave me an F for my Ben Simmons to Charlotte idea. They kindly shit on it. Yes, I would agree that that's a terrible idea for both teams. Is that I haven't seen enough of the Warriors defense sort of functioning at a high level without Draymond this year to believe that would be a smart decision at all. And for Atlanta, where 3-point shooting has been an issue for them with John Collins struggling, throw Draymond in that fold with Clint Capella and DeJounte Murray, who shot the three ball okay, and Trey's now shooting it well, but that just gets really clunky really fast. And is Dre going to stay in Atlanta long term? I don't love the Capella Draymond fit. If you were, I guess, removing Capella as part of that deal, I don't see the merit to that one at all. So I would not do that for either side, is basically what I'm getting at. Carrigan asks, the Jazz are actively shopping Jarred Vanderbilt. What could they usually get back for him with such a small salary, or is he just going to get paired with a different salary? It's a fantastic question. It feels like, could he be moved by himself? Yeah, there are just so many trade exceptions floating out there that would be able to fit him, that I could see if they are getting a first round pick for him in that regard, or is it a good team that has sort of a throwaway salary that would want him and is willing to give up something? I could see him being moved alone. But also, it's when you look at some of the players specifically that I feel like are going to be most likely to be moved, there are two ways to look at it. Could I see him being paired with a Conley or Malik Beasley? Yes, because I think that drums up the return you're getting without actually making it that much more complicated to match salary, since he's making only under $4.5 million. And so it makes it easy to do that. You could even, if you're trading Jordan Clarkson, like, that's how you increase the return on a Jordan Clarkson. And the fact that I just mentioned all guards, that helps you even more, because he's a front court player. It's not like you're trying to pair him to Larry Markin or Kelly Olynyk, who we can play with. But why is a team trading for two front court players? They're not going to drum up the return significantly. And so if you're trying to get, just as an example, out of, like, I don't know who would be like a good Malik Beasley trade destination, or if it's Mike Conley to the Clippers and you're not getting their 2028 unprotected first round pick for Mike Conley, which I would not do if I was the Clippers. Let me make that clear. I'm not trading for, but would they be willing to do it if Jarred Vanderbilt's involved? I honestly don't know, but that is one way that you could go about it. And so I don't know if that's the most likely scenario with him to be moved, because I could see them just sort of holding on to him. And it feels like maybe Malik Beasley is more likely to be moved on his own. So if I'm going to rank the Jazz players that I think are going to be moved, I think it's probably Malik Beasley, then Jarred Vanderbilt, then Mike Conley. I might even be able to talk myself into Conley over Vanderbilt, just because he's on such a steal of a contract. But also, if you don't want him playing a ton with Walker Kessler. Even then, though, you're not. I don't want to say you're thin in the front court, but like Kelly Olynyk might leave after the season. He's a free agent. You have Larry Marketing, you have Walker Kessler. You're not like overstocked there, where you're trying to find minutes for. He's been playing additionally lately, like Ochai Agbaji. You're trying to create more guard minutes, so there's almost an incentive to moving some of these guys, especially when someone like Malik Beasley is at the apex of his value. So I think he's the most likely Jazz player to be moved. And I probably would still have Jarred Vanderbilt second. If I had to pick, just because I don't want to be hedging here, do I think he gets moved on his own or as part of a bigger trade? I can cop out to the extent where I'll say he gets moved with someone else, but I'm not saying that someone else is just like Conley or Beasley. It could be with Rudy Gay or something. It could be with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Like it could be something on that scale as well. I would say he's probably, to pick of the players the Jazz would trade, that he would also be traded with. I think he'd be most likely to be moved with Beasley and Clarkson, just because their salaries are in the middle end. You're still looking at sub 20 million in outgoing salary. With Conley, it gets a little complicated, but I would throw him into there. I'm just wondering what team would come in and give up enough to where they would get both of Beasley. And so you would get Vanderbilt with one of Beasley, Conley, or Jordan Clarkson. I don't know which team. There are teams that I think should do that. I just don't know which team would come out of the woodwork to do that. So let me just say, yeah, he'll get moved as part of a bigger trade, in part because I don't think you get a first-round pick for him alone. I guess just if there was a team that's really good and it's available to get, but Denver doesn't have one like this year available, and they're not going to give up Christian Brown, or I wouldn't think they would give up Bones Hyland for Jarred Vanderbilt. The Celtics already traded their first-round pick this year. And so like would they give up a 2025 pick for Jarred Vanderbilt? I just feel like you have three bigs already. I'd rather take someone in the trade exception. The Sixers don't have the first round pick available. The Grizzlies don't need him. It's like when you're looking at the tippy top, then everyone else, checking out the Bucks, like the tippy tops where they're in their own tiers to me is Boston, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. So Boston could use Vanderbilt, but they're not going to trade a first round pick until 2025. That feels too steep. The Bucks and Sixers just don't have a first-round pick available this year to trade, and they're not going to give a distant first-round pick for Vanderbilt alone. The Nuggets don't have a first-round pick. The Grizzlies, they don't need him. The Kings can't trade their first-round pick this year. But the tippy-top teams are the Grizzlies, Nuggets, Bucks, Sixers, and Celtics to me. Like those five are in their own tier. And so those would be the five that I would say they're at the level. I don't think all of them need him, to be sure. I'd say Milwaukee really shouldn't be going after him, and Philly doesn't really need him. But Boston and Denver are at that level where they could use Jarred Vanderbilt. They're at that level where they could give up a first round pick, but the picks they can give up are too distant for it to happen on its own. Next question here. I'm going to go over an hour. I didn't intend to do this. Comes from Kilhoss. He has they have an hypothesis. Okay. I like it. And this is the final question that we have. There's pressure building. Free agency has been devalued due to bird rights, restricted free agency, and the Supermax. So there's going to be huge movement at the deadline. Teams are signing players to trade them rather than letting them leave. There'll be tons of teams treating this deadline as an early free agency and many more mixing things up because of tight standings. There'll be a few big moves, but many more small moves than we are anticipating. I will co-sign this mostly because I predicted we had 16 trades, I believe, last year, the week of the trade deadline. And I predicted we would get more. I didn't think we would get something on the scale of James Harden to Philly and Ben Simmons, James Harden to Philly, Ben Simmons to Brooklyn. But I think because there are so many teams that are in this, there are going to be a few that overpay for something. There are also going to be a few that will make the bookkeeping moves, Philly ducking the tax. But even just Cleveland, like if let's say Milwaukee is trying to make another deal and you need a home for Wesley Matthews, just to add some sort of wing depth whatsoever, does Cleveland sort of join in on that? What I will say, I agree with everything Killoff said about free agency. And there's a chance that changes the new collective bargaining agreement. But for now, no, like these big wig players aren't moving during free agency. Even when you look at the top free agents this summer, they're not ones that teams are actively going to clear cap space for. And so you're not going to see a lot of those moves. What I will kind of say here is, will there be more gamesmanship going on in the sense that because teams are so close to one another, are they going to be willing to make trades like intra-conference here? And that's just something I'm curious about. That's always been an element of this, is you wouldn't have those teams helping out one another. But now we're talking about such a huge field. Let's use the West as an example. You go all the way down to the Lakers. So that's 13 teams in the West that you could say, well, they're not going to want to do a deal with each other because they're just so jam-packed together. Like, who's going to want to help the Nuggets if they're still trying to compete this season, or the Grizzlies? You might be far away from those two teams, but the Kings at 3 through the Lakers at 13, not super close together, but they're 5 losses back, separate each other. The Kings have 21 losses, the Lakers have 28, I believe. So 7 losses. Like, that's just close enough where could we see a lot of that going on, and then we're going to see fewer deals than we think. I ultimately believe that there will be a bunch of trades that happen. I think we will have some coming to Jesus moments for a lot of these teams where they believe, no, we know the Timberwolves aren't going to sell, but we already know that the Jazz have kind of pivoted here. But like the Blazers, I identified as one. Another team looking at the Raptors, the Bulls, the Wizards could fall into this. The Pacers, even after signing Myles Turner, they get rid of Buddy Hield here. I also think that we could have teams that pony up in asking price to say, hey, this is an overpay, but we're really going to go for it now. Not the Grizzlies, which I think that they should do, but do the Clippers. Do they try their team? Is this the year the Golden State Warriors finally do something where they're going to trade some of the prospects? But I would argue that the offseason trade market could actually hold up some of the in-season trade market, where if you're, I'll use some of these teams as an example. If you're the Mavericks, if you're even the Suns, like kind of just scoping around the Kevin Durant or Pascal Siakam trade markets, are you kind of waiting? Like, you don't want to put in any multi-pick, Godfather offers now because of what could materialize over the summer. I think that's a flawed way of thinking for a team like Phoenix, and would be the same for the Clippers because they have such a, like, your window is now. But that could slow things down. And so I've gone back and forth on this, but your hypothesis, I co-sign it, to the sense that there are so many teams that fancy themselves being able to compete for something special that they have to do something. It won't be all of them, but there will be a handful that talk themselves into saying, hey, we will give up X for Malik Beasley, would be an example. What also could slow the trade market, though, is a team that you might think of as a seller, not actually being a seller. And I think the one I would point out the most here is Detroit. They're going to have cap space this year, another high draft pick, a healthy Cade, Jaden Ivey, Killian Hayes, what he's shown, just a lot of talent on the roster. They might be under pressure to win. And so it does feel like it makes them less likely to move Bojan Bogdanovic or Alec Burks, both of whom are under team control for next year. Burks has that team option, and Bojan Bogdanovic signed that extension. They would be a team that, unless they're blown away, they might not trade Bojan Bogdanovic or Alec Burks at all. And they also, in the process, might not be willing to take back less than savory money. So if you're the Heat, and yeah, we're willing to pay you to take on Duncan Robinson, Pistons don't want to do that because they want to use their own cap space to make impact plays. They have enough to where they could still do something, but there are a lot of pitfalls in the trade market. I ultimately just think that when you have this many teams so packed tightly together, there's going to create an influx of belief that, hey, we can do this now. And while every team won't be able to go this route, there will be more than we expect. We look back and say, that's not a deal that they would have made in another season. Like, maybe you're giving up a first round pick and more for a player that normally would have only gone for a first round pick, if that. Where it's like, let's use Malik Beasley as an example. Like, would a team give up not 2 first round picks, but more than a first round, but prospect and a first round pick for him, where another season they wouldn't have? So I think we'll see more of those types of trade, like the Malik Beasley level players being moved, the Josh Hart level players being moved. But I also would just, I'm not caution. It's not even a warning. I would embrace this. There's always weird shit, own shit that happens at the NBA trade deadline that we just didn't see coming. We can try and spot it. I think you go to the Bulls, that just feels like a team that we've kind of stopped talking about with as having blow up potential, but it wouldn't shock me if they moved Zach LaVine. It wouldn't shock me if the Wizards, we're re-signing Kyle Kuzma. No, Kyle Kuzma gets moved. Bradley Beal requests a trade at the last minute. Like, those are, I'm not predicting it, but it could be something like, John Collins is still in Atlanta, but the Bulls traded Zach LaVine. What about just, and I'm going to go into this on the Atlanta Division trade. What if, because not that I don't want to say he's less important, and he's like one of the single most valuable trade assets in the league, in my opinion, but because you have someone like Tyrese Maxey in Philadelphia now, and Philadelphia is rolling, but Tyrese Maxey's been coming off the bench. Is he like all of a sudden maybe more expendable? Like, Tyrese Maxey got moved with Tobias Harris because the Sixers wanted to get in on the OG Anunoby sweepstakes, and they were able to get OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr. for Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris. I'm just spitballing here. I don't even know if the salaries match there. Those are things that can happen. I wouldn't bet on them, but there will be, I would say, at least 1 to 2 blockbuster size moves. Like the Blazers teardown was a good example, and then the Kings trading Sabonis. Like, those were blockbuster, not top 5 players involved, but those were blockbuster-ish moves, if not actual blockbuster moves that happened that were not in the ether, at least materially, tangibly being talked about a ton. We knew, oh, maybe the Pacers would trade Turner or Sabonis. We kind of thought it'd be Turner, and we knew the Blazers might blow it up. Like the exact trades, the exact parameters, the exact suitors were not known until it actually happened. And so I will just co-sign what you said, Kill Hoss. Maybe it's wishful thinking because so much of my time is invested in being paid to think about and write about this. I know some people are anti-transaction, yada, yada, yada. I do enjoy this stuff to a point. I'm always relieved when it's over. I like analyzing the fits of new players more than I necessarily do of coming up with hypothetical deals. But because I spend so much time doing this, I don't want it to be sort of for naught. And so I'm just going to will that busy trade deadline into existence. And I will close this by saying, as an announcement, and we'll announce it at the top of our future podcast, HardwoodKnocks is going to be on the Bleacher Report Live app on trade deadline week. We are doing something, I believe, at 2 p.m. on February 7th as a trade deadline preview. And then at 5 p.m. Eastern time on February 9th, we're going to be doing winners and losers. That's Grant and I. I don't know if it'll be branded under HardwoodKnocks specifically, but we will be on the BR app live streaming. If you don't have the BR app, get it, download it, come support us that way as we're trying out new things in this current podcasting climate, I should say. And it would mean a lot if you come watch. We're very excited about it. We both work full-time for Bleacher Report, so it's not like something that comes out of total left field, but it's going to be fun and something different for us. Maybe we need to do more live streams with us, like amongst the YouTube or something, if that's something you would enjoy. But I would say, and we'll announce it, I'm burying it at the end of an hour plus podcast. I don't know who's going to get this long. Unless anything changes, Grant and I will be on the Bleacher Report app live streaming the February 7th to preview the trade deadline and then to go winners and losers on the February trade deadline. And so come support us there so that they invite us back. And maybe that could hopefully become something we, even if it's just annual or something that we're just doing more of, any way to interact with you guys and just sort of diversify the content we're putting out and to expand the audience that we're reaching. And so, like I said, you're getting an inside look here. Not inside look. It's not just an announcement. I want to try and just make sure as many of we're going to be putting out a separate podcast the day after that will have our trade deadline wrap up, but come listen to like our really off the cuff reactions to it. And it would mean a lot if you, and I'll try and remember to promote it on social media. That could get iffy on real time. And I've never done the Bleacher Report live streaming thing. I've done the YouTube thing. So we'll be talking with producers and we'll figure that stuff out, but wanted to announce it here. Maybe I'll throw it in Discord, but our Discord listeners are probably the most likely ones to get to this point. We're both very excited about it, but come support us there. Until next time, and as always, though, remember to subscribe if you haven't done so already, especially if you've made it this far. What the hell? If you haven't subscribed, shout us out, tell people about us, join our Discord, bring people to the Discord that have not already. The link is in the podcast and YouTube description. Until next time, though, I'll leave you the shout out to the one player we know won't be moved to the trade deadline because he's untouchable, Frank Ntilikina.